Well, we've looked at a little bit of Plato's philosophy in general, and in particular the way in which that philosophical sensibility shapes his theories of aesthetic life and aesthetic value. In particular, we looked at the notion of censorship, the idea of justice, the idea of education, and the way in which the arts, they need to be under control because they merely represent the truth and in that sense can be spun about willy-nilly to all sorts of unfortunate ends if they're used unwisely, which he thinks they are, unless they're in the hands of the philosophers. Anyway, from that, we should probably go on and begin to look at the next feature, the next milestone in our study of the history of aesthetic theories, in the West anyway, and that of course is Aristotle. And I would propose that the best way to do that is by getting a sense of where Aristotle is coming from in general philosophically, and then going on and talking about it in relation to his aesthetic theory, as we were doing with Plato basically. And as with Plato, trying to get a handle on the whole of Aristotle's philosophy is not something we're going to be able to do here in this short time and space that we're talking about it. Probably Aristotle even more so than Plato, because Aristotle is, if anything, extensive. He is encyclopedic, he is methodological, he is rigorous, and he is, for reasons that perhaps we can go into a bit in our conversations on the threads, rather difficult to read, although it's not because he didn't know how to write, it's because of who he was writing for and why he was doing it the way he was doing it. Anyway, that's a lot there, but let me say this about Aristotle as far as giving us a general background for him. Aristotle, as you no doubt read and know, is a student of Plato's. He was perhaps Plato's most famous student. But even though that's the case, Aristotle was not exactly a follower of Plato. This isn't to say that he was a wholehearted critic of Plato. He did offer criticisms, but he wasn't his enemy. You know, he wasn't the Republican to Plato's Democrat or something like that. He was more of someone who took a great deal of his teachers' and mentors' ideas and recast them. He thought that they weren't entirely off base, but he did think that they were missing very important elements for a thorough and adequate view of the cosmos. He thought that what they did get right, they tended to overemphasize and also misplace. So let me say a little about that. Let me say a little about how Aristotle tried to correct this, and we can go on there from to his aesthetic theories in particular. Okay? All right. So, as far as where Aristotle was coming from with regard to Plato's ideas, well, Aristotle didn't exactly think that Plato's notions of ideas, the formal ideas, his idealism, you might recall, it wasn't exactly that that was wrong. It was more that it was misguided. Misguided in a couple of senses. First of all, it was misguided in the sense that Aristotle didn't think that these ideas were universal, abstract, eternal principles, the way I think I put it in, they're woven into the architecture of the cosmos. Aristotle didn't see ideas or forms quite that way. He agreed that there was a basically formal nature to things that was part of what made them what they are. There's a way in which they're arranged, and there's a principle to that arrangement, and that's part of the way that you talk about what a thing is. But he didn't think it was out there somewhere. Rather, and he didn't think it was unchanging. Rather, what he seems to have thought is that this formal reality, this formal set of principles that allow something to be the way it is, this was inside of the thing itself. This was part of the thing itself, and it's located into it. So you want to talk about some of these books in my library back here, you want to talk about a work of art, you want to talk about a set of activities, the formal nature of it is within the presence, what he's going to, the organization, what he's going to call the substance of the thing itself, right? It's not out there somewhere. So that's one thing. The second thing, probably in some ways even more important for Aristotle, is that he thought that Plato was overplaying the argument and about ideas. And the reason he was overplaying it was not just that he thought that the ideas were misplaced, these eternal ideas that are out there are misplaced. He also thought that if you want to explain something, you have to have a whole other set of tools to begin doing that. Now, the way that Aristotle approached that was through his famous theory of causes. When Aristotle talks about causes, he means something much more than what most people mean when they think about cause. A lot of times when we talk about cause today, just in sort of our conversations and our conventional ways of thinking about it, we think about the thing that came before. So, what caused the milk to spill? Well, the little kid knocked it over with his elbow, you know. And maybe if we want to be a little more extensive and nerdy about it, we can say, and gravity and the physics of liquid on Earth and things like that. We could give all sorts of examples, but basically we talk about something that came before it that exerted force and made the thing do whatever it did. That's what we mean by cause, right? All right, when Aristotle talks about cause, he means that, but he means a lot more. Aristotle defined cause as the how and the why of a thing. That's what he called it, the how and the why of a thing. And he said if you wanted to get at this how and the why of a thing, basically there were at least four basic elements that you had to account for. You had to account for what he called the material cause, the formal cause, the efficient cause, and the final cause. What are these things? Well, let me tell you. Material cause is, for lack of a better word, the stuff that makes up the object in question. So in the case of a chair, it might be wood or metal or plastic or whatever stuff the chair happens to be made of. Not the shape of that stuff, but just the stuff, the stuffness of that's there, right? That's the material cause. The formal cause is the shape, the way in which the stuff is put together. So in the case of a wooden chair, that it's got four legs and a back and a seat, and the seat is related to the back this way, and the four legs come up into the seat this way, and so on and so forth. The efficient cause is the force that brought the material and the formal causes together. In this case, it would be the carpenter, the guy who built the thing. And then the final cause, probably what's going to be most important for us as far as our discussion about aesthetics, is the purpose of the thing, or the direction of the thing. That is to say, what it is that it does that allows it to instantiate, to manifest, to make the meaning and identity of the thing work in the world. You see, Aristotle had a very much more dynamic view of the way the world works. He still thought that there were things, but he thought that these things were what they were because they're doing stuff, because they're acting, because they're engaging. And the effect of this was that there was going to be this great sort of causal chain, this causal web almost, of each thing being what it is in relation to everything else, right? In the case of the final cause, you've got a way in which this thing doing what it's doing is acting chair-like. It's being sat on. It's being used on as an example in these little cyber lectures I'm giving for being what they are, and it's that aspect of it that allows it to be what it is. Now, one more thing I got to say before we go on with this. This fourfold cause that Aristotle uses and wants to use to explain everything, okay, this fourfold cause, the material, the formal, the efficient, the final, it applies to anything you talk about. You can use it to talk about chairs, you can use it to talk about artwork, but I'll tell you what else, you can also use it to talk about human beings. You can also use it to talk about something like, I don't know, music, maybe even mathematics. Anything that you could talk about at all has the fourfold cause applied to it because it accounts for the nature of what allows it to be the thing that it is in sort of this web of activity of the world, right? It accounts for it in that regard. Now that's going to be important for us because when we begin to look at Aristotle's aesthetic theory directly, which we're going to do in a moment here, what we're going to see is that art, and specifically poetry here and tragedy, is something that helps us clarify and awaken the final cause in us. That is the final cause of what it is to be a human being, the part that shapes us. And from that, it directs us towards a kind of realization. It can, if done rightly, if used rightly, if it's done skillfully, bring us to a place where, far from getting us to act badly or be misguided and confused the way Plato thought, can help us realize the fullness of our humanity. What's required is skill. So I'll get to that in a second.